Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Ben, and this is another edition of Fresh Red Kills. So, Fresh Red Kills are the videos where I talk about the books that I have recently finished reading. I've got two of them today that I read in February. Actually, this one I kind of began in February. I finished it the very first part of March, but I'm just going to consider it a February read. So I've got The Lost History of Liberalism and The Last Temptation of Christ. I'm going to start with this one. And if you're new to my channel, I don't really consider these book reviews. These are book discussions. My videos are informal. They are unscripted. I will ramble. I will misspeak. That just goes with the territory. I'm just talking about the things I was thinking and what I thought about these books. So The Lost History of Liberalism, From Ancient Rome to the 21st Century by Helena Rosenblatt. I read this as part of a group read that was part of a Historathon, and that's a year-long reading event where we read, discuss, and celebrate nonfiction history. We divide the year up into quarters, each one being 3 months long, and each one looking at a different time period. And as the year goes on, we basically get closer to the present. The first quarter one, looks at prehistory to 500 CE. And when we kind of chose this book as a group read, I think most of us probably assume that it would talk a little bit more about the ancient world, because it does say from ancient Rome. Ancient Rome really gets about 3 pages. That's about it. It really doesn't have much to do at all with that. It is mostly about the 19th century. That's the majority focus here of this work. So what Rosenblatt is looking at, she's looking at really what does it mean to be liberal, and how did that change over time. So she talks about how in the early period, especially before the French Revolution, liberal was really an adjective. It wasn't a noun. If you were, liberal was for somebody who was wealthy, and it was like how generous were they? To that effect, something like that. And then things start changing in the French Revolution, and it does start become a little bit more of, it starts changing its meaning, but it also afterwards can start being used more as a noun. You can be a liberal, not just be liberal. And one of the things that she really stresses here is that there was no single agreed definition on what liberal meant, and it was constantly shifting, constantly changing. At certain points it meant kind of a laissez-faire, hands-off approach from the government. And then towards the end, especially as social problems kept increasing, it became more about government involvement in helping people. It's both sides claiming the moniker of liberal. And I thought that was really interesting. I thought she did a pretty good job sort of tracing all the different avenues. Basically, like, you follow this river and all these different tributaries that you're going down, about what liberalism meant, like I said, especially in the kind of late 18th and then throughout the 19th century, and particularly in Europe. She has another sort of agenda here where she is trying to reclaim the place that both France and Germany had in developing liberalism. Those are two nations, especially Germany, which, because of things like World War I, were kind of written out of the history. Their contributions were largely ignored, stifled, and so much of the emphasis on liberalism ended up getting put, especially on Britain, and I guess to a certain degree, the United States as well. But she's really trying to say that no, especially in the 1800s, France and Germany played major roles. So those are all. That's the sort of gist of it. It's really about tracing what this word meant in different ways, and she looks at lots of different avenues. I found she introduced me definitely to some interesting individuals I didn't know about before. One of the big ones that I was happy to learn about was Benjamin Constant. I'm saying that in a very anglicized way. This sort of French politician or political thinker, who from the French Revolution and through the first part of the 19th century seems to have really kind of been a standard bearer of liberalism. And we see over and over again leaders, getting people support by promising that they will be liberal, and then once they get power, reneging, basically taking away all of that. So that seemed to happen over and over and over again. And, I couldn't help but read this without thinking of uh, the current state of affairs in my own nation, the United States, and what is happening um, with the way the direction of the nation is going. And I took small comfort, I guess, in the fact that I'm reading about this, and it seems like the triumphs of liberalism are far, far longer lasting than the triumphs of conservatism. Conservatism seems to be, they win victories, but they tend to be very short-lived. And, the pendulum will keep on swinging the other way. So yes, I think that, I consider our nation to be in quite a dark time right now. Very, constitutional crisis. And it's frightening the direction that we're heading in. But the pendulum, as I'm reading this, I keep thinking it will swing the other way. And like I said, liberalism's victories last far, far longer than conservatism's. So anyhow, I thought this was interesting. I don't know how everybody else necessarily thought about the book. I haven't really heard too many others. But I think like Justin over at Triumphal Reads, I think he was maybe lukewarm on it. But yeah, if you've read this, I'd certainly love to hear what you thought about it. And then I finished off the month reading The Last Temptation of Christ by Nikos Kazantzakis. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Hopefully I am. This was originally published in 1950. Let me see if I'm doing this right. Does it say it there? No. Well, it says the English language translation, 1960, but this was published in the early 1950s, originally in Greek. And this is translated by PABN. Now, I had seen the movie, the Martin Scorsese directed film, a long time ago. That came out in the 1980s, and I remember all the controversy surrounding it, and it's a film that I like. I think it's a good movie. And I guess to put all my cards on the table here, I am not Christian. I grew up in a very kind of laid-back, relaxed Catholic setting, but by the time I was a teenager, I knew I was not somebody of faith, and that Christianity wasn't for me. And that my opinion hasn't changed on that. But I was struck when I watched the movie version of this by this more humanized vision of Christ. And of course, a lot of the backlash was because it went against a lot of things in the Bible and, arguably blasphemous. And, I don't have a problem with that. That's what I find interesting about it. But I can see why it would rub a lot of Christians the wrong way. That's why, I definitely was intrigued for the same reasons about this, about how it would be treated within the original book. So, and before I read this, I had said in a video that I was planning on reading, especially as part of a sort of Historathon side quests. So I already said what Historathon was. I've been doing my own sort of side quests, and within the Historathon event, we consider side quests to be other ways to sort of learn about and, share a love of history that aren't necessarily just nonfiction texts. And one of the things I wanted to do this year was to read more historical fiction that went along with the different quarters. And the only thing that I had for the ancient world was this. So this is not exactly historical fiction. It's really not. There's actually some weird anachronisms that I'll get into. But nevertheless, it takes place, of course, during during the Roman Empire. So, I kind of picked it for that reason. But it's one that I've had on my shelf for a long time, years and years, and I'm finally just getting to it now. So what do we have here? We have the story of Jesus, but this is a Jesus that is very much, he's divine. He has supernatural attributes. He is definitely like the Son of God, but in many ways he is very, very human. He has faults, he has fears, he has temptations. That goes right to the cover here. And in the beginning, the author is really throwing it right in your face. Jesus is a carpenter, but he is a carpenter who is making crosses to crucify people. And he mentions it at one point, the reason that he was doing that, he knows he has some kind of mission from God. He doesn't know what it is. And he doesn't want it. And the more he resists, the more tortured he is by like extreme pains and things that rack his body. And he is making these crosses so that almost like this sinful act will tether his soul to the ground. He doesn't want to do this thing that God wants him to do. But eventually he does kind of come around and starts accepting his mission. So obviously having him be a crossmaker is a pretty bold move. And we have other major shifts from the Bible. I mean, the author is basically following a lot of the basic story structure from the Bible, of course, with its own twists to it. One of the big ones, and one of the ones I think is most interesting, is how Judas is depicted. Judas is not a betrayer. He ends up being, I mean, he's a militant sort of, Jewish freedom fighter, but he is the most devout, ultimately, of the apostles, of his disciples. It's the other ones that don't come off well. The other ones are, they're frankly obnoxious most of the time. But Judas, and I'm going to be doing minor spoilers here. Again, this was made into a film. I'm not giving every little spoiler away, but I have to talk about certain aspects of this. Judas only betrays Jesus because he's asked to. He wants him to. He doesn't want to himself, but Jesus wants him to. So we start seeing Jesus kind of go through, and the book also, pretty much comes out and says that a lot of the stories about Jesus are fabrications, such as him being born in Bethlehem, and the three kings coming and giving him gifts. The book basically says that no, that's not true. He was born in Nazareth, but we have these fabrications that make it into the Bible, but it's suggested maybe that they are divinely inspired fabrications. So even though they didn't actually happen, it's more about the truth of the message. And that's something that kind of comes back in the end, which I found really interesting about the book. We have Jesus kind of go through his ministry, and he does become more angry. He is at least starting to be depicted as somebody who, the authorities would want to bring down. That middle section for me was a little bit, I felt like it was starting to lull a little bit. There wasn't enough deviation from the Bible to make it all that interesting. But then in the third act, it starts picking up again quite a bit. When I had said that I was going to read this in an earlier video, one of my friends on booktube there, Brian MR, he had said that he had read this years ago, and he remembered Lazarus basically being like this zombie who was just lingering. And I was looking forward to that. And we do get that. The way that Lazarus is depicted in here is pretty amazing. He's not resurrected like whole. He is resurrected as like these perpetually kind of rotting corpse. And we have a certain scene where he is basically taken out for a final time, and it's like gruesome. I really like that scene. And I'm a horror fan, so it really fit with me. And then we do get to the whole idea of the last temptation. So the last temptation is Jesus on the cross, and he gets tempted by Satan. Now, what is like a fraction of a second on the cross gets played out in the book in a longer form. So we get to see the temptation actually play out, where Jesus is basically being tempted with family, to actually have a wife, things like that. We see him really kind of, in love with Mary Magdalene in this. That's like somebody who he desires throughout the book. So he has very human, kind of heterosexual male urgings. And that, again, we go back to him being human. And I thought all that stuff was really interesting. There were some really cool things going on during that time in the book. And overall, I did like it. I thought there were, like I said, some really intriguing aspects. We have, like I said, that Lazarus stuff I thought was great. We have a terrific thing where this is during his temptation, where he meets Paul. Paul was originally Saul, who was out there hunting Christians, and then he says that he saw Jesus on the road and he converts. And I know I'm not doing justice to the actual story, but he basically becomes Saint Paul. But he never actually met Jesus. So in the kind of temptation vision that Jesus is having, Jesus is kind of like an old man, and he's actually talking to Paul. And when Paul is talking, he keeps saying like, no, you're lying. You didn't, these things that you were saying happened. They didn't happen. And he has a great argument with Paul. I like what Paul says here. He says, what is truth? What is falsehood? Whatever gives wings to men, whatever produces great works and great souls and lifts us a man's height above the earth, that is true. Whatever clips off man's wings, that is false. Jesus replies, you won't keep quiet, will you, son of Satan? The wings you talk about are just like the wings of Lucifer. And then he says, no, I won't keep quiet. I don't give a hoot about what's true and what's false, or whether I saw him or I didn't see him, or whether he was crucified or wasn't crucified. I create the truth, created out of obstinacy and longing and faith. I don't struggle to find it. I build it. I build it taller than man, and thus I make man grow. If the world's to be saved, it is necessary, do you hear? Absolutely necessary that you be crucified, and I shall crucify you, like it or not. It is necessary for you to be resurrected, and I shall resurrect you, like it or not. For all I care, you can sit here in your miserable village and manufacture cradles, troughs, and children. If you want to know, I shall compel the air to take your shape. Body, crown of thorns, nails, blood, the whole works is now part of the machinery of salvation. Everything is indispensable. And in every corner of the earth, innumerable eyes will look up and see you in the air, crucified. They will weep, and the tears will cleanse their souls of all their sins. But on the third day I shall raise you from the dead, because there is no salvation without a resurrection. The final, the most horrible enemy is death, and I shall abolish death. How? By resurrecting you as Jesus, Son of God, the Messiah. And Jesus is having this argument back and forth about what's actually true. And Paul is basically taking more of a, I guess, utilitarian role, saying, no, what's true is actually what works, not what's actually objectively true. It's just a really interesting exchange that we're having. Again, the book doesn't say that Jesus is not the Son of God in here. He doesn't say that he doesn't have supernatural powers. Like, he definitely resurrects Lazarus, who is dead. But a lot of the other things about him are maybe not true, or not true in a literal sense. And I thought the book played around with that stuff in a really interesting way. Now, there were some drawbacks here. Like I said, the middle of the book was kind of a little bit of a lull for me. But also, we have, this isn't the kind of thing I would normally bring up, but it gets very distracting towards the end. We have, I guess you could say, some very mid-20th century European prejudices regarding race that are in here. And they make for some strange moments in the book. There are a lot of anachronisms. Like, at one point, the first time we meet Judas, he's chewing on a corn cob, which there was not corn cob in ancient Judea. And then when we see crucifixions, we constantly see gypsies helping, the Roma. They're helping crucify people. At one point, they mentioned a gypsy fortune teller in the street. There were no Roma in ancient Judea. Their ancestors, their people, were still over in India, around there. They wouldn't leave for another 500 years. So to keep throwing these kind of stereotypical gypsies in this ancient world is very odd. And then even worse is the way that basically black people are depicted. Every single black person is nameless and a servant. There is a clear sort of racial hierarchy that works in the book that wasn't in existence in the ancient world, where if you have dark skin, you are assumed to be a nameless slave. And at first, that just kind of played out in the background, and I'm like, I noticed it, but I didn't think whatever. It's an older book. I can deal with it. It's not a big deal. The only reason I say it here is because at one point, Satan turns himself into basically a black child. And he is with Jesus for supposedly years as a black slave. And he is never given a name. He is only ever called the Negro. And he is really just seen as this sinister, almost trollish type figure the entire time. And it's unfortunate. It's just kind of this scar, that this blemish that as I'm going through the story, I'm like, man, we didn't have to harp on these people that badly in such a sort of blatantly prejudiced way. It just didn't need to be there. But it's just something that we see between gypsies and black people. The prejudice is very much there on the table, and it's hard to avoid. Said, I wouldn't have mentioned it otherwise. I expect older works to, obviously they're not going to be progressive. They're not going to be up to modern standards of what we would consider, racial equality. But when it becomes a function of the story, and it's kind of hits, you're being hit over the head with it, I kind of just have to mention it. And so just as a reminder, these are not, I don't call these things reviews. These are just the things that I was thinking while I was reading, and that's definitely something I was thinking. So I would still recommend the book. I don't think it's fantastic. I didn't love it, but it was intriguing and interesting enough where there were moments in here where I was really engaged and enjoying, especially a lot of the dialogue. It's a lot of people talking about God, and of course, obviously, it's Last Temptation of Christ, and it's, you know, it's dealing with those things, but that's all people talk about, no matter what characters are, are, whether they're talking to Jesus or not. We see conversations going on when Jesus isn't there, and that's all that they're talking about. So, you know, you're getting a lot of it. Anyhow, enough rambling. So those were two books that I read in February. Like I said, I finished this one up right in the very beginning of March, but I'm considering it a February book. So that is The Lost History of Liberalism and The Last Temptation of Christ. So if you've read either of these, love to hear your thoughts. And as always, thank you, booktube.